16th of March, just gone 10:30. Can I just remind you all that this meeting may be recorded and subsequently made available to the public for listening purposes, and if you could put your mobile phones on silent or switch them off or airplane mode. Just ask now for the Sederunt apologies, please.
Thank you, Chairman. We've got 18 members present this morning. Apologies from Councillor Tate, Councillor McClelland and Councillor Doogie Campbell, apparently not present.
Thank you. And do we have any declarations of interest today? No, thank you. Just before we get on to the minute of the meeting, I'd like to just welcome Stephen Morgan, who's sitting in the room today observing proceedings. He's the new senior manager for children and families, and has taken over this role following the retirement of Liz Bell. Stephen joins us from Shetland and brings a range of knowledge and experience to the post, and I'm sure we'll all look forward to the continued development of children's services under Stephen's stewardship. So welcome, Stephen. On to the minute of the meeting for the 16th of January. Are we happy to approve this? Yep, thank you very much. And item 4 then is a local model of community justice. We've been asked to agree to receive a presentation on the Community Justice Partnership. So I think before we go on to recommendations 2 and 3, if we're happy to agree that, we can take that now. Agreed? Thank you very much. And I'll hand over now to for the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Vicky Binney, and thank you very much for inviting me today. I'm the Community Justice Manager for Dumfries and Galloway, leading on the local model. So what is community justice? The Scottish Government definition in the National Strategy for Community Justice is the one you can see there. Originally, there was a very clear focus on reducing reoffending. That's what community justice was all about. However, with the development of Community Justice Scotland, who are the national body providing leadership for community justice, the definition has now become even broader and includes prevention and early intervention. In Dumfries and Galloway, we made our definition much more simple, and this then became the name of our plan moving forward. We think community justice is just about communities, but also about creating just communities, where people are brought to account, but then have the opportunity to make positive changes and reintegrate into their community locally. This is why we felt our strapline was so important: strengthening relationships, building resilience, and reducing reoffending. So, community justice in a nutshell. We know that if community justice was just about criminal justice, police, courts and prisons, fixing the problem wouldn't be an issue at all. However, it's about so much more than that. As you can see from the slide, lots of things impact on the way that people behave and whether they then feel part of their community, including all of those mentioned above. But I think, and we as a partnership think, the most important thing that influences people are their own families and the communities within which they live. The justice system is a very complicated one, and short-term prison sentences often do much more harm than good. There's a lot of robust evidence now which supports this view. Looking at the underlying issues and the reasons why people offend in the first place means we are far more likely to provide an opportunity to change, and all the partners involved in community justice may have an influence on this, as do local communities, particularly when you consider the importance of relationships. So we need to start thinking differently. This quote comes from Jean Freeman, and it's always really resonated with me. People involved in the justice system are not some strange group sitting apart from the rest of us. 1 in 3 men in Scotland and 1 in 10 women have been involved in the justice system. So they are, in fact, just like you and me, with intelligence, with dreams and ability. Sometimes, however, they lack a little bit of hope. I added this slide to demonstrate the range of potential partners involved. The statutory partners are shown in dark blue. Locally, we have NHS, Dumfries and Galloway, the Integrated Joint Board, Crown Office, Scottish Court Service, Scottish Prison Service, Local Authority and Police Scotland. New community justice partners who have joined us are Scottish Fire and Rescue and Skills Development Scotland, and both have really added value to our partnership already. We have strong local authority representation from criminal justice, youth justice, housing and homeless, which all have a huge impact. The third sector, although not a statutory partner, bring real value to our partnership, and we have a duty to engage with them. We also need to consider at all stages the needs of victims and families, and by families I mean the families of those involved in the justice system as well as the families of victims. And we have representation from Families Outside and Victim Support Scotland on our partnership, who've supported us with lots of multi-agency training this year. So nationally, we have new Scottish Justice priorities, and these are in the paper A Vision for Scotland and Community Justice Outcomes. The community justice outcomes will feed into the national justice outcomes, and our own local outcomes will feed into them all. So in Dumfries and Galloway, we produced a 12-month plan initially, which we're now coming to the end of. This identified 8 priority areas with 21 actions, and we also recognised that the partnership itself needed time to become established and become robust, and this was a key action. We've managed to achieve most of the actions we set out to, with lots and lots of activity over the last year. There's a couple that will carry on into the next plan, but that was circumstances out with the control of the partnership. We also received extremely positive feedback from Community Justice Scotland, who received the 32 local plans. So what we've achieved in the last year: we've raised lots of awareness and begun to create a clear and distinct community justice identity in Dumfries and Galloway, with a simple definition of what community justice is. We use the paper on the slide you saw, Community Justice in a Nutshell, with all our partners. We've built much more effective links between children and families social work, youth justice and criminal justice, linking well now with community justice on a wider basis. We've established a health and justice subgroup and an early intervention prevention subgroup headed up by Scottish Fire and Rescue. We've coordinated and delivered multi-agency training with over 150 local people attending that from different services and organisations right across the region. We're jointly hosting a free screening of the Resilience film with NHS Health Scotland, which highlights the impact of trauma and adverse childhood experiences and events. This sold out within 2 weeks. The film is being shown on the 26th of March in Dumfries, and a second screening is planned for Stranraer at the end of the year. We've been proactively involved in funding bids to develop the partnership, and Hollywood Trust have encouraged the partnership to apply to them for funding in future. And we secured funding through the ADP for the production of Z cards to help fill the gap left by the Arrest Referral Service. I sit on the National Steering Group of Community Justice Coordinators and also the Scottish Working Group on Women Offenders, which helps to highlight the profile of Dumfries and Galloway nationally. We're working with colleagues from Health to carry out a programme of multi-agency trauma training over the next 12 months, because people who've been affected by trauma come into contact with all our services. So our strategic priorities for the next 3 years are the ones you see in front of you. These all link really well into the national ones. Beneath each of these, this is underpinned by an annual action plan with partners leading on specific actions within that. We felt that these were strategic enough to cover a 3-year period, but also give us flexibility so that we can adapt if things change. I just wanted to show a quick slide on adverse childhood experiences and events. These have been a real focus for Community Justice Scotland nationally, and Police Scotland are now training new recruits in ACEs, as they're called, when they train new officers. Adverse childhood events and experiences fall into 3 categories: abuse, neglect and household dysfunction. Having a family member in prison is one of the adverse childhood events. Community Justice Scotland, as I said, is really pushing this at the moment, and they often refer to people in the justice system as both the most damaging but also the most damaged people in society, with many experiencing trauma. Recognising this and working towards positive changes is a priority for us all if we hope to make real and lasting change. This slide just highlights even more. Young people who've experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences are 20 times more likely to go to prison at some point in their life. I just think that's a startling statistic. So what do we need to consider for the future? There are changes happening that we need to plan for. The presumption against short sentences is a very welcome one. We know, as I've said previously, short-term prison sentences don't work. Indeed, you're actually almost twice as likely to reoffend after a short-term prison sentence than you are if you complete a community sentence. Community sentences offer people the opportunity to change and pay back to their communities. They also enable family relationships and housing to be maintained in all the relevant links. It's recognised that women often become involved in offending for many different reasons, completely different to men quite often. A new model for the custodial estate for women in Scotland is now underway, with the first community custody unit being built in Maryhill, Glasgow. CCUs, as they're called, will be small facilities housing approximately 20 women close to their local community. The original plan was for 5 of these units, but currently the Scottish Prison Service are just going ahead with 2, as well as building a new national facility on the site of the old Corton Vale, which should house 100 women. Our prison population is ageing. This creates problems, particularly around health and social care. Prisons have adapted cells for those with impaired mobility, but this problem is continuing to cause issues, and we need to respond to that. The Scottish Government are keen to extend the use of electronic monitoring, but with the inclusion of support. They've learned from other countries that electronic monitoring is at its most effective when there's also support with it. This then increases the effectiveness of it. So there's a first time for everything. And locally in Dumfries and Galloway, we'll have to submit our first annual report on progress to Community Justice Scotland in September, August, September this year. We intend to keep our report very local. We've got a template from Community Justice Scotland, but it's very data focused, and I think you don't capture the flavour of the activity and what you've been involved in unless you've got some case studies and activity in there. We intend to keep it easy to read and understand so that it's accessible to everyone and charts the progress of our partnership. Community Justice Scotland held their first national conference for community justice called Rewriting Scotland's Story last Friday in fact. But why do all major conferences and events happen in Glasgow and Edinburgh? As a local partnership, we are keen to organise our own community justice conference, which although local would attract national attention and highlight the good work taking place across our region. As stated previously, ACEs, Adverse Childhood Events, are attracting lots of attention, particularly in Police Scotland at the moment. All partners are interested in this area of work. You only have to look at the bookings for our local screening of resilience to see that. That's why we'll be rolling out multi-agency trauma training led by the Community Justice Health and Justice Group over the next 12 months. Criminal justice social work are involved in lots of positive community work through the delivery of community payback orders. These orders provide structure, routine and skills to the people undertaking them. And we feel it's important that as well as paying back to their communities, people complete their order with a recognised qualification. This being the case, we've been in discussion with Employability and Skills Service to create a partnership whereby the evidence gathered while someone's doing an order can be used for the SQA Employability Award. Perhaps the first time many of those completing an order will have received a qualification or a certificate that they can then take to an employer. I would ask members to note the progress of the partnership to date and to agree to receive future reports and updates as required. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicky. I think just one of your points there, I think we would obviously welcome the eyes of the nation being drawn here if we have an event, as opposed to being the default position in the central belt. One of the things you did mention there was community payback orders, and it was just obviously a lot of members here. I know Councillor Bell raised it the last time, just in terms of information about what community payback orders are being carried out, what positive impacts or otherwise is that having on the community. So, any further information on that? I
would direct you to Lillian. Criminal Justice are one of the community justice partners.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware when I delivered on my Chief Social Work Officer report that I had advised we would bring to this committee the outcome of our yearly audit and report on unpaid work community payback orders. Unfortunately, the report continues to be embargoed by the Scottish Government, and we have been advised that at this moment in time we are not able to report to the elected members on the progress to date. That is as a direct consequence of Community Justice Scotland not having their business plan submitted, and as the legislation is currently written, both reports have to be reported on at the same time. So consequently, I'm unable to bring that report to elected members. However, we submitted that to Scottish Government in September 2017. So all the information is there, and at the earliest opportunity, I will share that with members. I would also advise members that as part of Social Work Scotland, the national body, I'm the chair of the Justice Committee, and along with my other colleagues from Social Work Scotland, we are having a meeting with Scottish Government to try and resolve this issue, because under the legislation, elected members have the right to know the outcome of unpaid work within their localities. So apologies on that front, but just to keep you up to date on that. Thank you.
I think Lillian having my card is probably a good way to keep me quiet, but I'll throw it open to members. Are there any questions for Vicky? I'll take Elaine first, and then I'll come back to Councillor Bell and Councillor Dempster.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a couple of points arising from your presentation, which was very interesting. The first, I think, is not anything you can do anything about, but I'm extremely disappointed to hear that SPS has now retracted to only 2 female community custodial units. In fact, there was discussion at one point whether there should be more than 5, and the reason that there were as many as that was the importance for women offenders of being able to get contact with their families, and that was one of the things which was wrong with Court and Vale. And to go to just 2, I think that is a serious retrenchment from a position where there should have been more, really, to allow women to interact with their communities and to interact with their families. But I know that's not something that the local community justice authority can do anything about. The other one was when you were talking about adverse childhood events. There's work collated by the British Psychological Society, which indicates that brain injury in childhood, not necessarily very severe brain injury, more minor brain injury in childhood, can result in cognitive problems later on, and also in the development of the part of the brain which assesses risk, and that there's a correlation between people who've had brain injuries and then later on being in the criminal justice system. And I just wondered whether there's any work being done with the health service in terms of identifying those children which may be at risk because they've had brain injury and offering them sort of early intervention and support before it gets on to the point where they're engaged in offending behaviour.
On the first point, what Scottish Prison Service have said at the moment, they've gone down to 2 community custodial units because when they had looked at the women that were part of the custodial estate, there was only enough for 2 units that met the criteria of need. But one of the reasons I'm part of the Scottish Working Group on Women Offenders is that they had lobbying for that. They do a lot of work, Anne Pinkman's involved in that work nationally. When it comes to adverse childhood events and, as you say, cognitive damage, I'm also involved with Youth Justice, and the Youth Justice Partnership are doing some work, doing a pilot with Annan Academy at present, with a cohort of 10 young people who are displaying pre-offending behaviour, if you like. So there's quite intensive support going in for those young people. Not all social work support, it might be other agencies that are relevant, but they'll be followed over the next few years. There's been a new cohort identified, and what we've suggested is that maybe perhaps they look at the number of ACEs these young people have, because that hasn't been part of the criteria, and that would give us a chance to do some work around that as well. But I don't know, I'm sure there will be work going on nationally, but I can try and find out more about that and send you some information.
Thank you. Councillor Bell.
Thanks, Chair, for raising the question I raised a few weeks ago regarding the community payback orders. Obviously, earlier on your presentation, Vicky, you're talking about reducing and reoffending. Obviously, reoffending people some people are maybe reoffending all the time. There's no figures to mention about your reoffending figures as well, and how are you measuring this in other areas across Scotland? And that obviously there will be certain characters will be reoffending all the time, and then someone's doing a community pay back order, you might not have them back for 4 or 5 or 10 years or a lifetime. So I need to know the figures there so to see it's actually working. I'm
actually in the process of producing a report on the reoffending figures. It has been said that they're not a great measure because the figures in Dumfries and Galloway have remained fairly static over the last few years. They're much lower than the Ayrshires and lower than Scotland nationally. But when you look at individual aspects, so the reoffending rate for women is lower than it is for men. The reoffending rate for somebody on a short-term prison sentence is much higher than for somebody on a community payback order. So it's quite a big piece of work to produce a report on it, but I will do that and make sure that that's circulated to you.
Thank you. And Councillor Dempster.
Thanks, Chair. On community payback orders, notwithstanding the fact that I realise these individuals have fallen foul of the justice system, the outcomes from community payback orders, I think, are tremendous, both for the individual and for the wider community. And the winter warmth programme is one of the good examples that I'm sure all members are aware of. But I do think that as a system in this area, it actually works and works well. Mm-hmm. And my only hope is that there will not be OMDD in community payback orders, because that will be an indicator that the criminal activity has dropped. But I would think that's a very, very positive approach to the justice system dealing with offenders. But I have another question for you, and it's about the presumption against short sentences. And I see you say currently there's a presumption against 3 monthly short sentences, and you're moving towards a presumption against 12-month short sentences, and I support that. But then I would know maybe suggesting to the judiciary that if they've got a position where they have to impose a custodial sentence, we're actually telling them it should be a long one. Because if you have a presumption against short ones, the obvious option is you're asking for, in certain circumstances, a longer sentence to be applied.
I think that did happen slightly when the presumption was 3 months. I think it's less likely to happen when the presumption is 12 months. In some respects, from a personal point of view, I kind of think there's some offences that you should never go to prison for, but we're not at that stage yet, and communities aren't at that stage where they would accept that. But I think it's less likely to happen with the presumption of 12 months. But I would like to see a transfer of resource so that we can support people effectively in the community when we're going to have more people to support.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Howie.
Much a follow-up from Councillor Dempster's there is the presumption of sentences under 12 months. How do you promote a zero tolerance towards domestic violence in these circumstances? My background is policing, and very rarely would you see somebody convicted of domestic violence being sentenced for a period in excess of 12 months. So how will that play out?
I'm linking quite closely with the Domestic Abuse Violence Against Women Partnership lead officer as well, so that we can do some more joint work. So I probably couldn't answer that in the first instance. I don't know if Lillian would have anything to add to that.
Thanks, Councillor Howie. Part of the work in terms of the new legislation to introduce the presumption against 12-month sentences was to look at some specialist court resource time to deal with particular elements of offending behaviour, and one of those being domestic abuse. So there's some pilots going on just now, particularly in Murray, with regards to having specialist courts where the judiciary sheriffs that will make those decisions will have special training on how to deal with incidents of domestic abuse and whether to impose a custodial sentence or not. As it currently stands, we are very much at the hands, as you will be aware, of the judiciary and individual sheriffs' views on particular offences. However, it's important for us under the community disposals to ensure that we've got appropriate opportunities if someone does get a community payback order to challenge some of those offending behaviour to minimise the risk, because we will never eliminate some of those levels of risk, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah, just as long as we're sure that victims have confidence in whatever's being proposed.
Thank you. We've got a few members wanting in, so first up, Councillor McClelland.
Thank you, Chair. Just apologies for being late. I didn't want to interrupt your presentation, Vicky, so I listened to most of it next door in the members' room. I've got a few points. The first one, I'm really glad to see on the last slide there the accredited training for the potential to get the SVQ Employability Award. I think that's a major step forward, and I look forward to seeing that coming into place. The second point, simply the custodial units, one in Maryhill, where is the other one located? And my final point relates to the comment you made there regarding the pre-offender behaviour programme at Annan Academy. On Monday evening, I attended a community council meeting in Annan, and there's currently a survey going on regarding antisocial behaviour in Dumfries and Annan, and it's a group called SACRO. And their initial findings is that it isn't the 16 to 25-year-old group that's creating the antisocial behaviour problem, it is the under-16s. So I really would welcome the opportunity to understand a bit more about the pre-behaviour programme, and if that's something that could happen outside the meeting, I would welcome that opportunity,
Yeah,
Vicky.
certainly.
Thank you.
The second community custodial unit for women, I think they're looking at Dundee for that one. Yeah. And I'll get more information about the Annan pilot from the Youth Justice Manager.
Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Sorry, Chair, just a bit distracted there. It was, first of all, to say, good presentation, really enjoyed the content. Totally agree with what Elaine Murray was saying as well with regards to women. It has been a major problem for a long time, and it's one that needs to be addressed. In fact, I used to visit Corntonvale with the prison visiting group, and quite often we would meet some of those women, and they were actually becoming institutionalised. And I hope that they've now looked at that, how they can address that, because it was having a major impact on the family. They were finding it easier to be in Corntonvale than actually face the problems back home with either the husband or the family. So the other point I was wanting to raise as well is in 3.5, you're talking about how you tried for 2 funding bids, and you actually did, you were successful with one of them, and one of them failed. Will you get a second opportunity at that other funding bid? And what was the reason that you weren't successful?
The funding bid we were unsuccessful with. Originally, it was through the Employability Innovation Fund, and myself and the manager for criminal justice had looked at providing a service that looked at the health needs of people on community payback orders and intervening really early. But the bids had to be supported by employability partnerships locally, and in Dumfries and Galloway, the employability partnership were putting in their own funding bid. So that's why we didn't get the first one, and the second one was the ADP cards. But as I said, I've since had discussions with Hollywood Trust and asked them if there's a partnership we can apply to them for funding, and they were very positive about that. So I think that's a good move. And also for women, there is additional support just now in the form of mentors for women coming out of prison through the Shine Mentoring Service, which is delivered locally by PIC Scotland.
Thank you. Councillor James and then Councillor Maitland. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As I understand it, there are to be 2 female homes and 150 people attended a seminar. But for me, the presentation is a bit short on stats for me to get a grip of the size of what we're doing here. I didn't see anything about how many how many offenders there are, excuse me. How many are in the council team working on this, how many hours were for payback orders, etc., etc. So for me, it's a little bit difficult to know what we're on about here. But I wondered if I was considering committing an offence, whether being forced to take a qualification would be much of a deterrent. And I wasn't sure how the community who are actually paying for community payback would think about that. And then I thought, well, what would they like? And litter is a very big problem in our area, and litter collection is a very high-profile activity. And I think there are members of the community who would welcome it if payback orders were directed in that direction, so that people serving those orders would pick up litter, and also potential offenders would see people picking up litter, and that they could judge for themselves whether that's a deterrent or not.
From my personal point of view, I think community payback should also provide, as well as being a deterrent, you're completely right, it should also provide people with an opportunity to not reoffend, and they can only do that by gaining qualifications. Nobody will be forced to gain a qualification as part of that. They can use a percentage of their hours towards other activity. So they will still be going out and doing physical jobs. I think criminal justice is going much more down the path as well of looking at what people are good at and their strengths, and helping them to be involved in payback that develops themselves and their community. But I understand where you're coming from a community point of view.
Councillor James, can I just answer some of your points if that would be helpful? In terms of the statistics of the hours and the staff involved, that will all be included in the unpaid work report, which I've already indicated, unfortunately, I'm unable to bring today. We do a significant amount of litter picking, which will be also reflected within the report over all aspects of the region. And I'm also currently working at a national level that we're going to do a whole weekend event across Scotland where we will do beach cleaning and pathway cleaning, and Dumfries and Galloway will be part of that overall process. So we do it, and we have more referrals to the unpaid work team for unpaid work than we would ever be able to deliver on, but we certainly prioritise litter as part of that process, and that will be reflected in the unpaid work report.
Do you want to come back, Councillor James?
Very shortly, yes. That's very reassuring to hear. There's a lot of litter collection in the programme. I think I remember Councillor Bell flagging us up last time that it would be great if there was some way of identifying the fact that that is actually happening live in front of your eyes as you pass it along the beach or the road. And I don't know if it's signage or I don't know if we're still in the age of uniforms, but if there was a way to communicate that it was being done, I think the public would welcome it.
In terms of identification, part of community re-integration would be to ensure that we don't target people on unpaid work. However, we do much publicity, and Claire took that from Councillor Bell's comments, and I have spoken to colleagues in PR to try and raise more. Unfortunately, the local press will only report on what they choose to report on, but we continue to provide them with information, and we do have plaques that indicate that the work was undertaken by unpaid work across many aspects of the region, and we continually review that.
Councillor Maitland.
Thank you very much. Well, I won't comment on orange jumpsuits and balls and chains and things. I think the issue about making certain that people do worthwhile activities is incredibly important, and I do recognise that it's extremely important to let the communities know. I mean, I don't think I know actually identifying the gangs is quite so useful. I think it's incredibly useful to let everybody know from end to end of the region that we do that. And I'm very heartened to hear about the litter picking, because I think that's a very good thing to be doing. The issue I want to ask about is worthwhile activities in prison. I had cause to read my APSI magazine before putting it in the bin, and one of the things, interestingly, that a prison in England is doing is recycling. Believe it or not, useful work on recycling. There happen to be streetlights. I don't know whether that's something that we are in charge of, through the criminal justice system, or whether that's not something that we deal with, whether we have any influence in that. Maybe I could have some help.
It's not something that the Community Justice Partnership would be in charge of. However, Scottish Prison Service are a statutory partner in community justice, so it's certainly something that we could discuss with them. I know HMP Kilmarnock, which is a private prison run by Serco, are doing some recycling work up there, but some of the other prisons, Berlin have a social enterprise, which is a bakery. Low Moss have another social enterprise, which I can't remember what that is off the top of my head, but they are getting involved in a lot more of that kind of activity, which I think gives people real job experience, if you like, as well, and prepares them to come back outside.
Could I just add as well, locally, Councillor Maitland, we do some joint work with colleagues in HMP Dumfries, and actually the winter warrant scheme that Councillor Dempster advised members of, the actual prison workshop assist us with some of that process, and then the unpaid work pick up the logs and do the delivery. So we do some joint local enterprise work, not to the same extent as some of the other units, but we're working towards some joint work with our colleagues in SPS.
Councillor Carruthers, were you wanting in at one point there?
It was a point in time, I suppose, but I thought what Councillor Holloway brought up was quite interesting in regards to the violence against women in particular. But I assumed that the sentence from a court is still at their discretion. So if they did actually want to do a short sentence, they could still do that, because I did think it was a very important point that you brought up there.
Councillor McGregor, were you motioning there?
Sorry, yeah, just briefly. I'm intrigued as to why we're calling it unpaid work. It makes it sound voluntary and is almost sort of decriminalising it. As far as I was aware, it was community payback. And we do have a national campaign for unpaid work and unpaid trials at the moment, and I wouldn't like it to get muddied with that, so just an explanation.
It is a community payback order with an element of unpaid work. That is the legislation. So you can have an element where you are given a community payback order which is unpaid work only, or you can get a community payback order which is supervision and unpaid work with a percentage of hours. So the terminology within the legislation is unpaid work.
Thank you, members. A very good presentation. It certainly raised a lot of questions. Thank you, Vicky. And I think there's a number of additional pieces of information that you're prepared to look at and circulate with the members of the committee. Also, I think we'll all look forward to the report on community payback orders, which is sadly embargoed. So I'm sure that'll come hopefully to the next committee, or as soon as possible anyway. So we're happy to note the progress at 2.2 and agree at 2.3 to receive future reports. Thank you. Item 5 is external scrutiny of social work services from October 2017 to February 2018. You'll all have had a chance to look at this. I appreciate there may be a few questions, so we're being asked to note the outcome of the scrutiny activity which took place from October 2017 as detailed, and also consider the progress. I'll open this up to members. Councillor McClelland.
Thank you, Chair. An observation I'd like to make within the appendix, and it's the sort of two standards of the reporting of progress and recommendations. For instance, if we look at page 13 under adult services and the report and progress from Dunmuir Park, when you look at recommendation 1, the progress is quite clear at 2.14 at the top of page 14 that it relates to the recommendation, and it gives a clear position as to where we are with the recommendation. But if we look at the top of page 13 at recommendation 2, where, I'll just read it out, managers should ensure that individual risk assessments include specific and measurable detail of the steps staff proposes for managing and or reducing the identified risk. When I look at a report, I would expect to see the progress comment relating to the recommendation. And I just think at 1.25, it's very, very weak and vague in the response, when over the page, we've got a really good response. So I think there's some room for improvement there, and room for better detail. When a risk assessment is specific, measurable, that's part of the 5 elements, SMART, that's applied to all risk assessment. And that's the key here. Anyone could say all children and young people have a risk assessment. That was probably the case beforehand. The key is the detail of the risk assessment and what's included in it. So I just think there should be better and much more detail to the progress comments in some of these points.
Thanks, Councillor. Lillian, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor McClelland. Clearly, the two units are very different services, and the response from adult services for Dunmuir Park has been more effective than the Care and Ryan Children's Unit, and I absolutely accept that. What I would say to members is that whilst we have made some comment on the progress today has gone at a more robust pace than when we first got the unannounced visit, and that is due to the change of the unit manager.
You happy with that, Councillor McClelland, for now?
Yeah, I'll take that response for now, Chair.
Councillor Sloan. Councillor Sloan, are you wanting to ask a question? Okay, there doesn't seem to be any... Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, Councillor Maitland.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm happy to note that Cairn Ryan House is described as very good. It's 5, so I think that's probably a reasonably reassuring assessment of the indicators there. I also actually want to commend Dunmuir Park Respite Service, although interestingly it's considered to be less good than the Hardthorne Road. Nevertheless, there are no recommendations. So I think basically well done, because we've had our problems with Dunmuir Park over the years, and I think it would be very fair to say that that's a good outcome. And we look forward, obviously, to things improving rolling forward.
Thank you indeed, and I'd echo that commendation. I think the one thing is, though, it would be nice to see a recommendation on how to improve to reach that 5 or a 6 even. Councillor Little?
Thank you, Chair. It's kind of on the same lines as Councillor McClelland there on detail. I see we have on charts and things, we've got 4s and 5s, and 5s look like, that's really good. But it says here very good. What does that mean? What exactly would a 5, would you have to be a 5?
Under the care inspectorate, their gradings, they have particular areas within each individual residential unit that they will assess unannounced. So they just turn up and they just observe staff, look at case files, talk to the service users, and they will make that full assessment. The 5 is the best that you can achieve, and they look to see whether the service that we provide to those service users, whether it be children's unit or an adult unit, meet the criteria of the registration of the unit. So a children's house will have a particular parameter to allow them to be registered, and if the service is meeting all of those, then clearly they would meet the threshold. For any service, if it's a 4 or a 5, then for us that's a positive outcome. If it's anything below the 4, which a 3 is acceptable, but for us it wouldn't be acceptable. So we're striving for all of our services to be in the good or very good bracket.
Thank you, Lillian. Councillor Doogie Campbell.
Thanks, Chair. Page 11, Hardthorn Road, quality of management and leadership was scored at 3 in January 2017. Could we maybe have a wee bit more detail about what action has been taken to improve upon that particular grading? Thanks.
Thank you for that, Councillor Campbell. Yeah, I mean, clearly that was a disappointing element of the unannounced inspection. I won't wish to go into any detail, but we have a new senior manager overseeing the children's houses at this moment in time, and there has been some challenge with the leadership within those units.
Just on that as well, obviously, because they're unannounced inspections, they don't always inspect the same sort of factors. So there's no date for the September one there in terms of the quality of management leadership. So we don't know yet what that looks like until the next inspection. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Just to say, I had a little experience of what an unannounced visit meant yesterday when I was at the temporary fostering panel, and they arrived in the middle of that panel and got a good idea of the impact that it has when these inspections are carried out literally with no notification whatsoever. Thank you.
I can't see any other members wanting to ask questions, but I think given that all the reports have shown at least a maintaining of the quality or an improvement in some cases, I think that's it's quite positive, but I think we should never relax and we should always seek to be improving, and hopefully we can get better detail linking to the recommendations in terms of progress next time. Are we happy to note as per 2.1, and then do we feel we've considered at 2.2 the progress that's been made? Yep, thank you very much. Item 6 is comments, complaints and compliments. We're being asked to note here the progress made since the last performance report, and at 2.2 the performance of the service in respect of the number of complaints for that time period, and then at 2.3 the number of compliments received by the service. Do we have any questions from the committee? Councillor Doogie Campbell.
Thanks again, Chair. The bottom of page 15, 3.7, there's a reference to the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman directed that needs to be greater emphasis on frontline service level resolution of complaints, which is welcome. Could I possibly have a wee bit more detail on what training the staff get in handling complaints, and also does the complaint handling element of roles is this assessed through the annual appraisal cycle?
Thank you. Gillian McNish, are you pleased to answer that?
Yes, hi. In terms of the SPSO's training, they do deliver some strategic level training to local authorities. That comes at a cost, and obviously there's a number of staff that will attend that and then cascade that training further out within the services. As part of the review that we've undertaken, which you'll see previously in the paper, we have been looking at a cohort of staff to deliver face-to-face classroom-based training, as well as flexible online training, which gives them a flavour of the understanding of the types of frontline resolution that we're talking about. It is within the gift of our frontline staff to look at early resolution with members of the public who are presenting with a concern or a complaint. So we're kind of working on that process of identification with frontline staff and then the ongoing management and resolution with more senior members of staff. And it will absolutely be picked up as part of their PDR on an annual basis, as when we identify staff that either have not been through the training but are experiencing these types of issues, or staff that have been through the training and are not, but perhaps could get involved in looking at resolution across services. So it's about looking at the skills that we've got and training the people, both frontline and the managers that are delivering on some of the resolution. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Maitland.
Thank you, Chairman. 3.10, an 18% decrease is actually, I think, extremely commendable. But if you look in the table in 3.16, there is an argument to say that we've had a bit of a jump in adults' complaints. And I wonder if somebody could help me by saying whether or not these figures are likely to continue going the wrong way, whether there is any pattern to the complaints that have been coming through. Maybe you could help me with that, please.
Thank you. Gillian, is that something you can address?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the decrease, what we've tried to do, which I'll take on board your point, it may not be clear, in terms of a decrease, but the perception of an increase, we're looking at frontline resolution and when a complaint or a comment is known to us. So we are using this as a recording mechanism to suggest that it is a stage 1. But in terms of the formal reporting, we have to report each and every one of them. So the 18% would reflect the number that we actually are not dealing with as part of a formal complaints process, but we are looking at in terms of frontline resolution as soon as we are made aware of it.
Yeah, please do.
I wonder, Councillor Maitland, as well, if I could raise with you that there has been an increase in terms of service user complaint with regards to the lack of home care input. That's a national issue which members are aware of, and quite rightly, service users are requesting information when they feel that their care package is not appropriate, or indeed we have challenge in meeting some of those care packages. So I would anticipate that we may indeed continue to have an increase in adult services, and that is an area that we are, along with the Health and Social Care Partnership, looking to address.
Councillor Ian Carruthers.
Thank you, Chair. I think probably more comments. It's not really so much questions, but when I was looking at it, it's paragraph 3.20. When a report's for note, and I tend not to say too much, but it made really good reading to me. On behalf of my parents and brother, I'd like to express our appreciation and highly commend the care that my parents are receiving from social work. We are grateful to those involved in supporting my parents. Words cannot really describe what that actually means to them. It then goes on and says, thank you very much to the social work, somebody else. You're doing a great job. The next one, I cannot praise the social work high enough. Her organisation, ability to deal with problems, communication with us both, and sheer hard work impressed them beyond measure. I mean, when you're hearing, I think that's important to pick up and recognise that as well, Chairman. It really is. That's people expressing how they feel, the emotions and the feelings are coming through there. But see the next one. This is one that I'm starting to pick up. So more the casework in particular. It's just round about the blue badge. So it's only for commenting, but I think there's a lot of people there at an age are becoming more vulnerable and find these forms difficult to fill in. So I mean, just that's only a comment, and maybe that could be passed on down through. But I've helped them. I've seen social workers help them. there's again, certain individuals, when they do find it difficult, but very, very important in regards to people as they get older, more vulnerable, being able to still access their own individual and private mobility, because it all comes at one point where we do lose that. So just comments really, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and I think I'm sure I can speak on behalf of social work in saying that even, you know, compliments like that are like gold dust, and I think it goes to show how much people really do appreciate what often we associate with complaints in difficult times, etc. But I don't know if you want to add a word to that, Lillian.
And I appreciate the elected member's comment, and I know that staff will appreciate that support. Thank you.
Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, mentioned about this frontline and service level resolution. How difficult is it to, because you also mentioned, you know, care packages for adults and the IGB's involvement in that, and how difficult is it to gel the two of them together? You know, if you're providing a service through social work, or it might be DG first or something like that, and the IGB has an overall influence in how things are going through the NHS. How difficult is it to get any complaints and resolutions done within that kind of sphere?
Thanks, Councillor Nicholson. I mean, clearly the delegated authority for the delivery of home care packages sits with the Health and Social Care Partnership. However, it's our responsibility to ensure that any complaints that are raised, then we engage with our colleagues within the partnership to look at how we can resolve those issues. Unfortunately, nationally, there is a shortage of providers for home care services, and in Dumfries and Galloway we have the added issue of a recruitment and retention problem to continue to deliver those significant care packages in some of the rural areas of the region. However, there is an absolute commitment from everyone involved in the partnership to continue to work to address those issues. The two complaints processes are very separate, however, they complement each other in terms of trying to deal with and resolve those issues.
Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. It is a difficult, you know, scenarios when you've got two different organisations with two different drives, if you want. You've got, you know, the hospital, you know, you've got bed blocking issues and trying to put people out in proper care packages and that, and it's trying to resolve them issues through both organisations. The other one is I know it's you know, the service level resolution part of it, and when does a stage one when does a complaint become a complaint and it goes through stage one? And I'm thinking about, you know, issues that seem to have been resolved in a service level issue, and it's been dealt with the individuals in that, and there seems to be a resolution there, but that resolution doesn't then come about, and then it goes on and it goes on at different levels, if you want. So it's the near miss scenario. How does that progress to a stage one? It could go on for a year, it could go on for 6 months, it could go on for, you know, a certain length of time, that it's not actually a formal complaint as such, but they're complaining to the service. And when does that become a formal complaint?
Thank you, Ronnie. Is that something you can maybe pick up, Gillian?
Yeah. Excuse me, absolutely. The formal complaints process kicks in as soon as we are advised that the person has a concern or is aggrieved or has a dissatisfaction with a service delivery or lack of service delivery. The stage one process is a 5-day process, so we would look to find resolution that's agreeable with the person within those 5 days. What this reviewed process allows us to do, and what we are moving more toward, is that early dialogue. So the communication at that stage actually identifies what the complexities are, so that we're not making any assumptions on what resolution might look like. We're actually working with the person. So we'll take those first 5 days to try and respond as appropriately as we can. What we can do at the end of the 5 days is agree with the person that we will do an ongoing action plan with them. So that means we take it out of that kind of formalised complaints process, which can be quite a challenging thing to go through anyway, and we'll move that into services and look at it operationally. And if there's additional supports that need to be done there, we will support them in doing that. The reason complaints tend to move to stage 2, where there's an independent investigation, is if the complexities are such that we need time to actually go and investigate the detail of the complaint. It may be that there are a number of services involved, a number of people involved, or it's spanned a period of time. So it allows both parties to be able to take stock and actually look at the underlying drivers for that complaint. The stage 2 process is 20 working days, and again, we agree that with the complainant, and there's ongoing dialogue throughout that whole process. And we do have the opportunity to extend it by another 20 days, which gives us 40 working days in total. But again, I would say that the emphasis is on good communication at the start, so we understand what the challenges are and that we're dealing with these people in the most appropriate way, and not just putting them through a complaints process.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, then are we happy to go to note the recommendations at 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3? Noted, thank you. Gives me great pleasure to go to item 7 now, which is a proposed schedule of reporting and assurance from the Clinical and Care Governance Committee. And we're going to be asked to agree the timescale and frequency of the reporting to this committee from that should read the Clinical and Care Governance Committee, and also to remit to full council the proposed reporting mechanism with regards to consultations undertaken under the Health and Social Care Partnership, which will provide us with a mechanism at last, I feel, to get the views of elected representatives to be tabled. Well, is there anything to add to the report before we open it up to members? Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, Chair, and thank you. And thank you, Lillian, for this. I know that, I see it being a good starting point, it's something that we haven't had in the past, where the council can report back to have that say in the IGB if you want. I know it's not, they can ignore it and decisions are made by the IGB, but I think it's something we haven't had in the past. I think it's something, and that is a good starting point to a positive and more respectful partnership, if you want. I think it is just that, though. It is a starting point. I think we've got to understand that. There are other aspects to it that we need to build on for the future.
Thank you. Do you want to respond to that, Lillian?
Yeah, I'm happy to agree, Councillor Nicholson. This is the first attempt to try and resolve some of the challenges that elected members have faced.
Councillor Sloan.
Sorry about that, Chair. I welcome what Ronnie's just said. And as a member of the IGB board, I'm totally at a loss at times as to what the reporting mechanisms are from either council, IGB, and onto the health board. And to make things even worse, only in the last few days, I asked where a decision had been made by the IGB. It was on the orthodontic service in Wigtonshire as Arms. I was told this did not go before the IGB. It went before a difficult decisions group. I wonder, are these officers of the council that take these difficult decisions for us poor individuals who can't seem to make them? I have asked for a minute of the meeting where it took place. This has been passed to Julie White, I believe, and I'm still waiting on that response coming. Could it be possible through your good offices that we can get some response to that?
Councillor Sloan, the difficult decision process is a process only for the health board. It is not at all related to the local authority. However, I will speak to the Chief Operating Officer and ask for your question to be responded to, but officers from the local authority would not be involved in that process.
Councillor Sloan.
Chair, if I could just make it quite clear that this officer said the difficult decision Committee had taken the decision, not on behalf of the Health Board, but for an IGB decision. And I think that should be looked into.
I can't make any comment on I'm not involved in it, but I'll certainly speak to the Chief Operating Officer and ask her to give you clarity as to what decisions have been made. But certainly under the partnership, I have no indication of any decision being made.
Thanks, Lillian. Could I now invite Councillor Maitland to ask a question?
Well, it's actually just a point to make. I mean, I absolutely agree with elected members that this has been a problem, and we have got to resolve it. The means of getting information to flow. But I want to make completely clear that the difficult decisions process has never been near the IJB. It's a process that officers actually have undertaken. And as far as that's concerned, it has never been near the decision makers, the public face decision makers. So I want to be quite clear about that.
Thank you. Councillor Murray.
Yes, I think just like others, I welcome the development and the reporting mechanism through the Social Work Committee and then thereafter through full council. The only question I would have is whether doing so on a twice yearly basis will actually capture some of the issues which are of concern to the council, and whether, if it does not, we would be able to review the frequency of those reports.
Thank you. I mean, I think there's a distinction to be made between what we're effectively agreeing the reporting to Social Work Committee in terms of clinical care governance, and then the remit to full council as a reporting mechanism with regards to consultations, which is a wee bit different. I'm just wondering if you'd maybe speak to that, Lillian.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Yeah, the remit for clinical and care governance to social work will be a decision for members on the frequency. In terms of the to full council, I viewed it that in terms of the outcome of a public consultation that would be appropriate twice yearly, just given that those would effectively take at least a 6 to 8 month period to be concluded. So the timescales for this committee are at the discretion of the elected members, and that's absolutely a decision for you to make.
Councillor Ian Carruthers.
Actually, I'll just, excuse me, I'll make it short, but I mean, I've got the same concerns as what other elected members around the table have mentioned. I've made this, I suppose, the highest level of, through the scheme of delegation decision makers, I've made them aware of that over the last 6 or 8 months in particular, and I agree with the sentiments of what's actually been said here.
Thank you. Just on the reporting cycle, I mean, it does recommend at 3.6 that this would be reporting to social work services on a twice yearly basis. Is that enough? I suppose is the question, and I don't know if that's echoed by other members, but if I could just ask that first before letting other members in.
Clearly, the clinical and care governance meets every 2 months, but I'm certainly, whichever timescale the elected members feel is appropriate, then there is absolutely no issue of servicing that at all.
Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, I think as we can review the frequency, perhaps 3 in the first year on a 4 monthly basis might be suitable, but we can review that at any time at all. Then if we think it's not enough.
I mean, obviously we've got a suggestion there for 3 times a year. Are we happy to go with that in terms of 2.1 in terms of the frequency of reporting?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, Councillor Mickey.
The only thing about twice a year is do we want the reports for the social that committee, or do we want the agenda for that committee meeting so that we can look through what's coming up at that meeting?
I'm not sure who you're asking there, Councillor McKee, but... I'll let Councillor Carruthers in there.
Just a comment, I think I am actually a member of the clinical and care governance. I think Councillor Maitland may well be as well. But I think all that stuff is very similar to the council. It's electronically available in advance of the meetings. So any member of the public, anywhere in the world, can actually see that information. But I think maybe Jock picks up on a point in regards to maybe this committee. But I think it is available there anyways for people if they wish to see it. It's not the easiest thing to find at times. Maybe if we had it in our e-agenda system, it would be easier for us. That might be a point, in fact, that if we could have that information easily accessible through the council's website as well, it might make a difference, Chairman.
Thank you. So, I mean, nobody seems otherwise minded, but we're happy enough to at least trial a 3 times a year type approach. Obviously, it'll have to fit in with the committee cycle that we have here, but in terms of the remit to full council, so I presume we're agreeing 2.1 with 3 times a year, and at 2.2 to remit to full council the proposed reporting mechanism. Are we happy to agree with that? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 8 is the Social Work Scotland Annual Conference and Exhibition, 13th to 14th of June 2018. Confidence, commitment and collaboration. What we're being asked to do here is note the details of the Annual Conference and Exhibition 2018 as detailed in 3.2 and 3.3, and agree at 2.2 the attendance of 2 members to attend on a residential basis. I don't know if there's anything to be added to this in terms of the value that it provides. Councillor Nicholson first.
Yes, I think the chair and the vice chair should.
Councillor McGregor.
I would agree with that on the basis that they would select substitutes if they couldn't attend.
Are we okay? I should probably add that it would be upon us to bring back a report to this committee in terms of the goings on relevant to the purpose of the event, obviously. With that, are we happy to agree, note and agree the recommendations? Yep. Thank you. Item 9 is the note of the Adult Support and Protection Committee for members to note. Are we happy to note? So, Councillor Maitland.
Just a comment here. I think the workshop details were very much as kind of warts and all. I mean, looking at that list, one begins to go, ooh, but on the other hand, one also says, well done for having actually drawn all this out. Are we going to receive a bit of update about what they're doing and how it affects our services?
Thank you, Councillor Maitland. We have a more independent chair of the Adult Support Protection Committee and the Child Protection Committee. It's a joint post now, and part of the process of the Adult Support and Protection Committee workshop was to do the very situation that you've articulated, and we absolutely will bring back progress reports and also the way forward with regards to the public protection agenda.
With that, are we happy to note the note of the meeting? Thank you. Item 10 is the draft minute of meeting from the Child Protection Committee. Again, this is for members' information and for noting. Are we happy to note that? I'll take that as a yes. Thank you very much. I should add, though, that I understand the Public Protection Partnership will be having its first meeting in June. I think it was put back. I think it was intended to be slightly earlier, but I think it's likely now to be June, which will bring together the various adult and child protection committees.
If members would welcome it, I could have the Public Protection Manager do an input to the next committee with regards to the progress of the public protection arrangements.
Thanks, Lillian. I think that would be welcome. Thank you very much for your attendance today. That's it. Let's go.